What's going on, guys? It's been a while since I've posted anything. I've got some free time today, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to first share some updates on my little Inferno in the Bluegrass project, which is the Battle of Perryville using the line of battle game system, and also share with you guys some pictures that I took. I was able to recently get down into Kentucky, took a little mini vacay with the girlfriend. We went to the Battle of Richmond, which is just south of Lexington, drove down to Somerset, and went to Mill Springs Battlefield, which was pretty cool, and spent an entire Saturday at Perryville. We probably put in about 12 to 13 miles of walking that day. It's a pretty cool battlefield, a little bit different than some of the other places I've been, Gettysburg, Antietam. There's tons of monuments and obelisks and all sorts of stuff that you see as you're physically walking or driving the battlefield, whatever it might be. Perryville's not like that. There's not a ton of stuff that you can see. It's all, relatively, I would think, the way that it kind of looked during the battle. So that was really cool for me from a, perspective of being a history nerd. I enjoyed it a lot. But it was good from a research perspective as well. I realized that there might have been some scaling issues with that first hand-drawn map that I did of the battlefield. So I've since gone and kind of trained myself and learned a little bit on how to use different softwares is that a word? Software, it's probably plural, to create a better version of that hand-drawn map that I can update as I need to without going to frickin' Office Depot and doing all that stuff. So I'm going to give you guys some updates kind of on where I'm at with that project. I'm at this point pretty much gung-ho into it. I've spent all my time recently. Gaming is all devoted towards either working on Perryville, and I've also come up with a map for Mill Springs, and I'm working on Richmond right now. Those are much smaller than Perryville even, and Perryville's not a huge battle, but they're, interesting, very interesting battles. Early war, so a lot of issues that you might not see reflected in other games in regards to guys have flintlocks in the rain. That's not good. So let's take a look at that, and then what I'll do is we'll look at the map. I'll maybe, point out some places that I was at on the map and show you guys some pictures. So if you've never been to the battlefield, it might be cool. You can get an idea of what it looks like and how the terrain looks, and I don't know, maybe it'll be interesting, maybe not. Let's see here. I'll pull up the map. Okay, so if you guys watched my previous video where Uncle John and I were playing live in July, I believe, you would have seen this map, which is the hand-drawn version of Perryville that I whipped up on my kitchen table, traced a bunch of topographical lines. It was a pain in the butt. I probably never want to have to do it this way again. But it served its purpose, and we play tested using this. Things seemed to work, the way we wanted them to. But I realized that I needed something better. This was not really up to the standards that I wanted it to be. So this is V2, version 2 of that map. It is by no means 100% complete at this point. I'm always making continual tweaks to it as I, find more information or glean more information from the sources I've already been looking at, all that type stuff. But for the most part, this is probably as close as I can get to being accurate and to scale. So, normal line of battle scale is in effect here, 20 foot per elevation increase. Every hex is somewhere between like 105 and 110 yards. So in that regard, this is perfectly functionable as a line of battle map. There's Perryville, you'll see over here. If I zoom out, that is the entire map right there. So it's maybe for comparison's sake, it's maybe 2 maps of like 2 full-size maps for, Last Chance for Victory, I think, has 6 in it. This is maybe 2 instead of 6. So I believe, it's got enough space where you can maneuver, but most of the action is taking place in a couple localized areas. So let's take a look here. Basically what we have, if you're not very familiar with the battle, it's not a huge Civil War battle. It's a large battle. The Union probably had somewhere in the range of 22 to 25,000 soldiers actually engaged in the battle. The Confederates probably had somewhere around 17 to 19,000. Those numbers vary based on who you ask. Confederate numbers, some people say they go as high as 24,000. Other people think that that's crazy, and they stick to really what's known without trying to interpret a bunch of other information that they don't have hard facts on. And a lot of that action happened in this area that you see right in front of you here. Basically, where you see Walker's Bend up to the north, there was a wing under Polk's command. Bragg acting as the Confederate Army commander. Polk was a right wing directly underneath Bragg. His entire wing attacked out of Walker's Bend, and they pushed on this location over here known as the Open Knob. So let me get back here. So they kind of moved from this direction kind of over into here, also kind of down into this valley. There were Union artillery batteries posted up on the Open Knob, and they really became a thorn in the side of the guys who were advancing kind of in this direction. The Confederates didn't really understand what they were up against. They initially thought that what they were attacking was maybe the left flank of a division. What they ended up running into was an entire corps. And what's really interesting about this battle is McCook's Union Corps really is the only corps that's majorly engaged in the action. Sheridan gets a division rolling later on from Gilbert's corps, but for the most part, it's an isolated conflict. Buell was about 2 miles away. There was an entire corps sitting down on this hill down here in Peters Hollow and Peters Hill, sitting up in this location, kind of around in here. They didn't move to any of the action. Buell was pretty much unaware that there was anything going on. And further south, down, if you would keep following this road down in this general direction, there was an entire another Union Corps. The Confederates didn't realize that all of these Union Corps were in the vicinity. They assumed that they were attacking a piecemeal Union force that was basically attempting to follow them as the Confederates were moving through Kentucky. A lot of action also kind of happened in this area, down in here. This was in the morning. Also, an isolated Confederate brigade moves forward, realizes that they're attacking basically what amounts to an entire division. Probably not a good idea. Another area where we have a lot of action is Confederates moving up from this direction across Doctors Creek and pushing up past the H.P. Bottom House, the Bottom Barn. With the Dixville Crossroads really is where these two Confederate forces advanced and convened, and their goal was ultimately to destroy the Union that they encountered. You can ask different people. Some, might call it a Confederate tactical victory. It was a Union strategic victory because after the initial conflict, the Confederates realized, wow, we're not fighting a small Union force. This is basically the entire Army of Ohio. And they had to withdraw. They ultimately would not have been able to fight another day unless Kirby Smith had shown up with his Army of Kentucky and reinforced them. So let's take a look at some pictures I took. If I can get a handle on how to scroll through this. So this location up here, Maney's Brigade, Confederate general under Cheatham's division, who's under Polk, basically attacked this position up here. This is where some of the most savage fighting took place of the entire battle. If I pull this up, we can pull this over. And this is looking from kind of where I'm starting to draw these lines right here up towards the open knob. And you'll see in this picture there's a little plaque up here and also a cannon sitting up there. There was a battery of 8 Union cannon up on that hill under a guy named Parsons. And the brigadier, who was, you know, in overall command of that battery, was a guy by the name of Terrell, and he was previously a artillery officer, became obsessed with this location of 8 guns, and basically disregarded his infantry brigade and was focused solely on repelling these attacks with his artillery. Obviously, it's kind of, you know, a slap in the face if you lose guns in the Civil War. So this was a valuable position. They really wanted to try to hold it at all costs. We'll just put a little mark there. So that's kind of looking, this would be southwest on this map here. Looking in the opposite direction, we can find a picture, if I can find it here. I'm very unorganized today. If you move up, there's a little fence at the edge of that woods where the Confederates halted and basically got into a firefight with those guns and infantry that was lined up on this ridge. Terrell ordered a pretty brainless attack by Green infantry from Illinois down this ridge into what probably amounted to the best Confederate troops on the field. That did not end well for the Illini. That location probably is situated somewhere maybe like in here. Here's another picture kind of that fence line looking up into there. There was a fence line here that's talked about in pretty much everything I've read. And here's a picture from the top of that knob looking out towards where the assault would have came from. So Maney's brigade would have been lined up back behind this ridge. These guns originally were facing in this direction. There was a brigade under a guy named Donelson, Confederate general, who was moving through this valley, and these guns were actually initially firing on him, getting enfilading fire. So Maney's brigade was ordered into this position up here to basically flank these guns and try to take the position. Parsons did a good job of rearranging his cannon, getting them facing this direction, and trying to hold this position for as long as he could. Up on top of this hill, so that's probably, I would guesstimate, maybe looking, that picture's, you know, looking in that direction right there. Right behind that cannon, where that cannon was at in that picture, there's a marker. Brigadier General James Jackson, he was actually a divisional commander, was shot here. This is one of the only instances, I believe, in the Civil War where an entire division has its leadership killed outright. Jackson was killed, Terrell was killed, and his other brigadier, guy by the name of Webster, was also killed. So basically the entire command structure of that division was dissolved. And there's a pretty interesting story about all those guys sitting around a campfire or something 2 nights before saying, you know, what are the odds that we get killed? And they're all like, oh, that could never happen. And what do you know? It happens to them. So that Confederate attack that began back behind this little ridge here and moved forward eventually pushed the open knob and moved down in this direction. So another brigade of Union decent veteran soldiers ended up forming on this subsequent ridge back here, and the Confederates kept moving down through this cornfield. So if we take a look at this picture, So this is a picture looking southwest, getting ready to cross that road. There's a little bit of a fence line here. This is called the Devil's Lane. There's a couple first-hand accounts where they talk about a little farm lane, and this is where that little farm lane would have been. If you look to the right of this picture, that's what's now known as Starkweather Hill. That's Brigadier General Starkweather kind of held that position. He had two pretty decent batteries. Generals under the names of Bush and Stone kind of held that position. And the open knob would be to your left, looking in this picture. And that's the location of that here is probably somewhere, you know, right around in there. There was a big cornfield right behind that open knob, and Starkweather pushed forward one of his most raw regiments, which was a Wisconsin regiment, basically sat in the corn and awaited the Confederate assault. They got off one volley, and then the Confederates just massacred them, basically. The guns that were sitting up on this hill in this picture, so kind of back behind this cornfield, were shooting at the advancing Confederates, but as happens, ended up basically mauling their own guys sitting in this cornfield. Not necessarily a place that you would want to be if you were a line soldier. So that regiment's probably sitting somewhere in here. Cannon are firing off in this direction. You've got advancing Confederates moving up over these ridges. One thing that I thought was really cool, you know, being at the battlefield, everything is so rolly. You know, you'll get down in one of these little valleys and you can't see the other side of the ridge. You get down in it, you're basically concealed. I think that probably has a lot to do with why this battle has one of the highest casualty rates of the war for men that were actually involved in the fighting. It's just because the information available, you didn't really necessarily know where the enemy was at. You'd come over a rise. Uh-oh, hopefully that's not bad. You'd come over a rise, and standing in the hollow below, you'd find a line of infantry, and you'd instantly be on each other without really knowing that there was anybody there. Here's another picture. Let's see here. So this would be up on Starkweather's Hill. So, you know, the Confederates are advancing through the cornfield. They push that Wisconsin regiment back, and they start to attack a battery of guns that's situated basically here and here. This picture is going to be kind of looking back out in this direction. So you'll see there's that cornfield. That lane would have ran kind of to the left in the picture of where that cornfield's at. And straight ahead right in here would be that open knob position. I think I've got some other pictures of this area. Thought my computer was going to freeze there real quick. So as the Confederates realized that, you know, the Union were in a pretty strong position, they ran into more guys than they thought they initially were going to. They repositioned some artillery batteries over in this vicinity so that they could fire onto these heights as the Confederates were advancing. So they were kind of able to use that location up there by the Yankee House to fire across Wilson's Creek and kind of create a little bit of some cover for their advancing infantry. This is a picture looking out towards the location of those Confederate batteries from the top of that hill. When I talked to the ranger at the station, I asked him, you know, a lot of these areas, what's the capabilities of being able to go and walk where these batteries were at? And he said, you know, most of that stuff's going to be private land where a lot of these batteries were basically posted. In a line of battle term, they were posted to these positions. You can't go just walking on people's property. But he said, you know, if you stand on the hill and you look to the, it would be northwest, there's a white barn. You know, that's almost exactly where that battery probably would have been placed, which is pretty cool. And that's about a mile, so almost at the, maybe a little under a mile. almost at the extent of, the range of a lot of those guns. So as that Confederate advance continues, they eventually push the Union off that hill. These brigades, are still continuing. They're getting worn down. They've been in hand-to-hand combat. Ultimately, they're not going to be able to maintain the impetus of the attack without assistance. And the Union basically have had regiments shredded, and they're falling back piecemeal. They get up here on Widow Ridge and form up behind the stone wall up here. And this is the location that's now called the high water mark of the West. So this was probably the furthest extent in the West that the Confederates ever, had, how do I want to phrase it, the most momentum, the closest they ever got to complete victory would have been right at this wall. And this was Maney's brigade, elements of Stewart's brigade, elements of Donelson's brigade. It's kind of hard to see. They don't really have much in this area in regards to the stone wall at this point. This is just a picture up on the top of that ridge. So this would be Starkweather's Hill looking on the back side. So that picture would be taken from up here facing this direction back towards where the last stand hill was at. And a lot of this area back in here used to be private land. I believe the Civil War Trust Fund came in and purchased a whole bunch of that. They've almost doubled the size of the battlefield in recent years, which is really cool. There's a trail that follows that advance, Maney's advance, so that trail kind of comes here. We walked it here, and then it kind of goes off this way, comes down into this hollow. They've got a bunch of signs that talk about the Wilkerson House, which was used kind of as a field hospital. You can come down here, follow this road. A lot of this area was really like super dense. I felt like overgrown, just a lot of this type stuff. When I asked the park ranger if this was how it would have looked, or you read things where there's feral hogs or livestock that are going in and trimming the underbrush so that the woods aren't necessarily overgrown, they're more of a clear woods. That probably wasn't the case in a lot of these areas, but at the same time they said, what you see is probably the way it looked. And I was there a week later than the battle actually happened, so the foliage probably would have been almost identical to what you're seeing in these pictures, which I thought was pretty cool. This thing's not behaving. Okay, so let me pull up my next set of pictures here. Let's see here. I've got like 200 and some pictures, so I'm just trying to pick and choose some of them here. Okay, yeah, so here's a good one. So this is down in Rocky Creek Hollow. This would be following the advance of Donelson's brigade. He was initially advancing alone and isolated because they didn't realize that they were going to be hitting an entire Union division, which basically then became an entire Union corps. They advance up here. There's a marker up there in that picture you'll see. That is right in this vicinity. Probably I would put that somewhere in here, or that marker's here where that picture was taken, was probably here looking in this direction. So you kind of go down that hollow, back up that ridge, and you'll see what I mean. The picture can't even really do it justice. That going down into that little hollow, my legs were freaking exhausted at the end of this trip. I think Katie had a watch on that determined how many flights of stairs we did, and it was something like 70 flights of stairs or something based on all the elevation changes, which for somebody who lives in cornfields and flat land, that's a lot of elevation. But I mean, you can see if you're down in that hollow, there's no way that you're going to be able to see to the opposite side of that ridge, and that's a good 20-30 feet down just right in there. So pretty interesting. There's a little creek that runs. That advance kind of followed this little creek, eventually pushed up here. The final Union line kind of maybe was in a position that looks like this maybe. There were Confederates that came up from the bottom farm region, which we'll look at some pictures there too because they're pretty. They're pretty cool. Let's see here. I really wanted to get some pictures of Walker's Bend just because I wanted to see firsthand, you know, how treacherous this right here was. And let me tell you, it's not an easy climb to get up that bluff. They did it historically, and I think you could do it, but to stay organized and to do it quickly it's impossible. There's no way that you could possibly do that. Unfortunately, this is all private property. I asked the park ranger if there was any way of getting back there. He said, unless you want to go ask the property owners, you know, that's probably the only way. I think he really wanted to give me permission because he thought about it for a while, but he couldn't, so that sucked. Oh, that's cute. So let's see here. Here's something, we'll talk about this. This is pretty interesting. So there was a Confederate battery under a guy named Carnes that was initially posted up on this ridge, probably somewhere in this vicinity right here. When the battle started, there was a battery of Union artillery right here under a guy named Loomis, and a battery up here under a guy named Simonson. These batteries basically went toe-to-toe with Carnes before the infantry really even advanced. So there was a lot of firing back and forth here, back there. There was another Confederate battery that came up and posted here. These guys started firing at each other. And there's a pretty cool view. So you can get up, you can climb up to where Carnes' battery was at up here and really get a sense of, you know, what you're looking at. So that's looking straight across the creek. You'll see that woods kind of in this general area. That's going to be reminiscent of where you see the bottom woods on the map here. If you look kind of to the left of that, so this picture is probably taken maybe with this more or less as the frame. I have some pretty cool pictures of Loomis's battery looking back across at Carnes. So that's Carnes looking closer to like where the attack started. Those are just positions up on the hill. It's pretty cool though to be up there and see, oh, you know, yeah, that makes sense. I see how they could have been firing at each other. You know, I can see what they can see, which is amazing to me that you could accurately shoot at that distance. I believe Carnes was probably right at the extent of his maximum range. So this is a pretty cool area. A lot of fighting happened down here. So Polk's wing was attacking through that bend. On the opposite side of the battlefield, Hardee's left wing was attacking up through this region. So he had Bushrod Johnson coming down here attacking like this. There was a brigadier named Adams that came up from this direction. There was Claiborne, the Stonewall Jackson of the West, came up through here. So a lot of big names really kind of hammered into this area. You had some Confederate brigades that were moving up here, kind of posted up on this hill and went toe-to-toe with a bunch of infantry sitting up here. Oh, yes. Let me show you this. This is cool. So there was a battery positioned right here, Confederate battery under a guy named Lumsden, and the Union battery under Simonson situated right here. What happened was there's Confederate infantry advancing up through here, positioned themselves up on this ridge. Well, this Confederate battery was in this position before this infantry advanced, but there's an optical illusion. This ridge right here really makes it look like anybody who's situated here is actually situated here. So this artillery fired for an extended period of time trying to soften up defenses, but they were firing at this position instead of firing at this position. And I can get you a really good look of how that might have happened. So this is directly behind where Lumsden's battery would have been located. From here, you'll see where those trees are at. That's where Simonson's battery is located. If we zoom in, this thing can clarify itself a little bit. Come on. Well, you'll notice that there's like a horse trailer and a truck right there because that's a stop. There's some plaques that are sitting out here talking about Simonson's battery. And those are situated almost directly on top of this ridge right here. That ridge is not the ridge that they're on. That ridge is actually this ridge. I have a picture of us standing on this ridge looking right here, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Let's see here. Where the heck is it? Okay, here we go. So this is where that Confederate artillery battery was actually firing. We're standing on that ridge that it looked like that horse trailer was sitting on, when in fact it's a good 300-400 yards in the distance. And there was Confederate infantry that eventually came up to this hill, fired on some Ohio and Indiana regiments situated up on these ridges, kind of in support of these batteries. A lot of fighting happened kind of in between here. This is called the sinkhole down in here. And there's, you know, first-hand accounts that say that the sinkhole was red with blood. But this was definitely an area where a lot of really brutal fighting happened. That's art. So another cool place where a lot of action happened, there was some Union infantry that was posted up kind of like this, maybe arranged like that, using that ridge. And like I said, this Confederate infantry kind of came in here and tried to hammer these guys. If we take a look at that, I have some good pictures. You know, if I was good at this, I would have prepared these pictures, but I don't care. Okay, so here's a good picture. So this is looking from right about here, probably facing about like this. I'm going to get rid of all these other lines. So from here, probably facing about like that. Looking down this ridge. This is called the HP Bottom House. There were some cornfields here, and there was a barn situated right off to the right of this picture that actually caught fire from Confederate artillery that was posted up on these hills back behind Doctor's Creek. There were wounded Union soldiers in that barn, and you know, story says that they were basically burned alive. Pretty grotesque stuff, but a lot of fighting happened right in here. We walked down into this area right here. There's a little bridge that crosses over Doctor's Creek, and we followed that creek kind of all the way around back behind that house, back into that area. Here's a picture of the HP Bottom House. It's a pretty cool little place. Get rid of some of these. And Doctor's Creek really isn't too much of a, wouldn't pose too much of an obstacle to infantry moving across it. This is probably a lot higher of a water level than actually happened at the time of the battle, too. There was a huge drought, which is part of the reason why the fighting happened where it did at Perryville, was due to water. The Union were basically under orders from Buell to move and probe forward and try to find water sources for the men. There's stories about them just drinking the nastiest, slime-filled, gross water that not even the horses would drink, and these guys are being forced to, you got to do what you got to do. You got to drink. So here's a picture of Loomis's battery. So that picture where I was showing you Carnes is located right up there, and if we zoom in, luckily Katie had a pretty high-powered camera with a lens. Come on. You'll see they put up some little icons up there that give the silhouettes of cannon facing you. You can kind of get a good idea of what those ranges might be. But that was pretty cool. All sorts of stuff. Here's Simonson's battery up on that ridge. So this would have been looking, Lumsden was probably sitting right in that direction. The sinkhole's directly below here, and this is kind of that ridge that that I call Illusion Ridge. That's really, it looks like anybody that's back in that woods is on this ridge, when in fact that ridge is probably 300 to 400 yards situated in the center of, either direction, both of these batteries. Let's see here. Anything else cool? Okay, so this is the slaughter pen. This was a location where a lot of the fighting happened towards the end of the day up here at the Russell House. There's a story of the 22nd Indiana probably situated somewhere in here, and Liddell's Confederate Infantry Brigade probably moving in a position like this to advance on the Dixville Crossroads. Well, it started to get dark, and Polk moved forward, probably rather foolishly, to ascertain whether these guys were friendlies or not. So, Polk's riding his horse up here, starts talking to these guys. They tell him they're the 22nd Indiana, and Polk probably is shitting his pants saying, oh, okay. Well, Polk rides back. He tells these guys to hold their fire. They're firing on friendlies. Rides back to Liddell's men. These are mostly Arkansans. And basically says they're Bluebellies, fire, and these guys just unload into the 22nd Indiana. The 22nd Indiana took the most casualties of any Union regiment at the battle. And it was basically because they were standing there not firing because they thought that their commanding general had told them not to, when in fact it was Polk doing his reconnaissance work. That seemed to be a theme in Kentucky, generals riding into other people's lines, because Zollicoffer did the same thing at Mill Springs. Unfortunately, his outcome was slightly different, and he was killed. So, really, that's, those are some pictures that I'll show you. Most of the fighting at the Battle of Perryville was confined. The major action happened probably in this general vicinity right here. That's not to say that there weren't skirmishes in other areas. There was some fighting. There was a Confederate brigade that moved up here during the main battle that happened here and basically pinned Sheridan's division in place on Peters Hill because he was concerned with his front. He wasn't going to go support these guys up here when he had Confederate infantry advancing on him here. Down to the south, Wheeler had some cavalry down here that was skirmishing with advanced cavalry from Crittenden's corps coming up from the south. But, so far our playtesting has shown, yes, most of the action is going to happen where it did historically, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity for alternative strategies. There's a couple different situations that we're trying to recreate, obviously, to play historically, but there's also, I think, almost as open-ended as you could possibly get in a battle if you start it at different times without the orders given basically for Polk to advance through Walker's Bend. Because at the beginning of the day, all of the Confederate infantry was basically situated over here to the east of Perryville with, one infantry brigade doing a little bit of recon up here and some cavalry up in this area. Most of the Union troops hadn't arrived on the field yet, Sheridan's division pretty much took up their position here. But you're going to have Union forces coming in piecemeal, and the Confederates are, for the most part, on the field. There's a lot of different variations that you could do if Kirby Smith showed up. I don't know if that's something that I'm going to really sink my teeth into at this point. I'm really trying to focus on Perryville. We've gotten some good play tests in. I think we're getting it honed in to where it's something that might be presentable here by the end of the year. I think this map is really helping because now I can feel like I'm working on something that I'm not going to have to change. And if I do need to change something, it's easy for me to get into the program and change where the woods are at, or adjust this road, or change the name of this. It's a lot more difficult to do that when you've got a hand-drawn copy. Well, you can't really, unless you draw all over it and make it look stupid and ugly, and I don't like doing that. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Perryville, I think, order of battle-wise, I really like where I'm at. There's always going to be odds and ends that I think I can find more information on, but for the most part, I think we're good with that type stuff. I will show you real quick. Let's see here. We can just briefly talk about Mill Springs. Mill Springs was a battle that happened really early in the war. It was basically the first Union victory of the war, actually. And Zollicoffer was a Confederate general who was killed there. That's really what the battle's known for. But to give you a sense of the size of it, let's see if we can pull something up here. This is the order of battle right here. So 3 Union brigades, some artillery attached, and 2 decent-sized, oversized Confederate infantry brigades. These might change a little bit. We're doing some play testing with this type of stuff right now. But we're enjoying it. We think that it's turning out well so far. Let's see here. I can pull up the map. And I really like that we can... Let's see here. Which file do I want? Do I not have a JPEG of this thing? What we really like, oh, no, not that, is that we've got something that we can play in a night that's line of battle, where the orders are given. You don't have to worry about orders. It's fairly straightforward. There's cool, things that come with the battle that make it unique. It doesn't feel bland. And there's really nothing in line of battle that you could just pop open and say, hey, let's play this battle that's 5,000 guys versus 5,000 guys, which I think translates into something that makes the series more accessible, a lot of fun, gives it some variation, and it opens up a lot of possibilities. I think that, right now it's big battles. Everybody wants to play big battles, and those are great too. Last Chance for Victory is my favorite game, and there's a ton of fantastic scenarios, awesome scenarios. But I don't think there's a regimental game on Mill Springs. I don't think there's a regimental game on Richmond. Hell, I don't think there's a regimental game on Perryville that's decent. Maybe there is one out there, but I don't play old games from the 70s for the most part, and I don't know about them. So, here's, for scaling purposes, here's what I have so far for Richmond. This was a fairly straightforward battle. 4 Confederate brigades basically attacking 2 oversized Union brigades of fairly raw men. Something orders would probably be given at the start. There'll probably be objectives, but it's something, hey, new. I think it's pretty cool. I'm having a lot of fun with the research side of it. I'm having a lot of fun, learning. The Richmond and Mill Springs and Perryville as well are really things that I knew nothing about. So to get in there, to start doing some stuff like this, it's been a lot of fun. I hope you guys find this interesting.